The world had always seen her smile. Perfect, composed, radiant. But behind that smile was a woman who had been fighting a silent war, one that even she never wanted to wage. A war that began not with crowns, nor with palaces, but with two innocent names, Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana. What if I told you that those names, those children, were almost erased from royal history before they ever took their first steps? What if I told you that behind the palace gates, in rooms so quiet you could hear the tick of an antique clock, decisions were made to ensure they'd never be called prince or princess? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because that's what Meghan Markle is now revealing. And her silence, after years of enduring whispers, mockery, and coded prejudice, is finally over. She's done pretending. And the truth she's telling isn't just uncomfortable, it's devastating. In her voice, there's no fury, just exhaustion, a mother's exhaustion. And yet, as she sits across from the interviewer, fingers clasped, eyes glistening, you can sense it, a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. The words that would soon spill out would shake the image of the royal family once again, reopening wounds many thought had healed. She starts with a confession. I didn't think they'd go that far. From that moment, you realize this isn't a story about protocol or royal technicalities. This is a story about power, identity, and a battle fought behind closed doors. A battle that left scars on her marriage, her motherhood, and her peace. But let's rewind. To understand why Meghan is breaking her silence now, we have to go back to the beginning, to a time when everything looked picture-perfect. The wedding bells, the global celebration, the promises of a modern monarchy. It all seemed like a fairy tale reborn, until the curtain fell and the whispers began. Do you remember the first time you heard that Archie wouldn't be a prince? The tabloids framed it as royal tradition. The palace said it was custom, but Meghan knew there was more. She says now, years later, that the decision wasn't just bureaucratic, it was deliberate, calculated, cruel. She recalls that night vividly, sitting in her bedroom at Frogmore Cottage, heavily pregnant, as Harry read out an email from the palace's senior aide. There's been a discussion, the message began, regarding titles. It's been decided that Archie will not inherit a royal style or title. Her heart dropped. Harry's face turned pale. What do they mean decided, he asked. Meghan didn't answer. She couldn't, because she already knew what it meant. The palace had drawn its line. And for the first time, Meghan says, she realized the weight of what she was up against. Not just centuries of tradition, but generations of silent discrimination dressed up as protocol. I remember staring at the wall, she says softly. I felt my child was being punished for who I am. Pause for a moment. Imagine that. You're carrying your firstborn. The world sees your smile, your glow, your fairy tale life. But behind the scenes, someone has already decided your child isn't worthy of a title that every other royal child of his generation will hold. And worse, they justify it as custom. Custom, Meghan says, was a shield, one used to hide something much darker. At that time, she kept quiet. The palace's media advisors told her to focus on her health and avoid speculation. But Meghan couldn't shake the words she overheard during a meeting. Words she says still haunt her to this day. They'll never be royal, one senior staffer said. It's best that way. She didn't know if it was set out of prejudice, fear, or sheer ignorance. But she knew what it meant. They were never going to let her children belong. Harry, ever the protector, tried to shield her. We'll fight it, he told her. But the fight wasn't just about titles. It was about legacy. The monarchy had spent decades curating its image, and Meghan, the American actress, the biracial outsider, was never supposed to rewrite the royal narrative. Yet there she was, doing exactly that. The institution, as Meghan now reveals, pushed back hard. Every time the issue of Archie's title came up, new, technical explanations appeared, some buried in royal charters, others conveniently misinterpreted. It was like chasing smoke. One day it was about lineage, the next it was about succession, and then suddenly it became a decision for the monarch's discretion. Convenience disguised as constitutional necessity. But Meghan wasn't just dealing with cold bureaucracy. She was dealing with whispers. There were comments about what his skin color might look like, she admits now. Comments about how it would look if Archie had a title. And that's when her voice breaks. Because no mother should ever have to explain why her child deserves to be seen. For the first time, Meghan admits she wanted to leave before Archie was born. I told Harry, I can't raise a child in a place where he'll be judged before he's even born. But Harry refused to give up. We'll change it from within, he said. They didn't know then that the system would never allow change from within. It would crush anyone who tried. That's the part the world never saw. The late-night phone calls. The redacted documents. The press leaks that weren't leaks at all, but carefully crafted narratives to make Meghan look paranoid, entitled, ungrateful. She remembers reading one headline. Meghan Markle rejects royal titles for her child. She laughed through tears. I didn't reject anything, she says now. They did. Think about that contradiction. The same press that framed her as power-hungry simultaneously accused her of rejecting power. It's irony at its cruelest. And yet, she stayed quiet. For years. Not because she was afraid, but because she was protecting her children. You can't win against an institution that controls the narrative, she says. So you wait. You survive. And one day, you speak. That day has come. As Meghan recounts her story, she's not angry. She's reflective. But there's a calm defiance in her tone. She knows that every word she speaks now will be dissected, twisted, debated. And still, she chooses to speak. Because silence, she says, was never protection, it was complicity. Her breaking point came during Lilibet's birth. We'd moved to California, far away from it all, she recalls. But even there, I felt the weight of what they took from us. She remembers seeing the birth certificate and realizing there was still no title. No recognition. No acknowledgement from the family she had once called her own. It was then that Meghan decided to tell her story. Not for sympathy, not for revenge, but for clarity. People deserve to know what really happened, she says. They deserve to know how deep it went. Because behind the polite palace statements and smiling portraits, there was another world. One of hushed conversations, power plays, and emotional manipulation. She talks about the meeting, the one where everything changed. It wasn't in Buckingham Palace, as many assumed. It happened, she claims, at Clarence's house, a small, dimly lit room, just before midnight. She wasn't invited. But Harry was. And when he returned home that night, his eyes told her everything. They said it's final, he told her. What's final? They're not going to give him the title. Ever. Her response? Silence. Not shock. Not yet. Just silence. Because some part of her had already known this day would come. The fairy tale had ended long ago. Meghan's revelation now exposes not just the outcome, but the process. She describes the layers of resistance, the unwritten rules that determined who was worthy of royal blood and who wasn't. They used language like protection and procedure, she says. But what they really meant was control. She paints a chilling picture of how the monarchy's old guard worked tirelessly to preserve appearances. Every decision was filtered through image, she says. How would it look? What would the papers say? How would the Commonwealth react? And then, the part that breaks her, no one asked how it would feel. Even now, Meghan admits, the palace's justification was paper-thin. They said it was about precedence. But Princess Anne's children didn't take titles because she chose it. Ours didn't because they weren't allowed. That's not protocol. That's punishment. And it wasn't just about names or crowns. Meghan reveals that denying Archie's title also stripped him of automatic royal security, meaning her unborn child would not be protected under palace funding. I was pregnant, she says, and they were discussing whether my baby deserved safety. Her words cut deep. It was that single act, the denial of protection, that convinced Meghan the institution didn't just want her gone. It wanted her erased. Her and her children. The perfect royal cleanup. When she finally told this to Harry, he sat in silence. I think I've been blind, he said quietly. It was the moment he realized his family's loyalty wasn't to him. It was to the crown. And the crown, in turn, had chosen preservation over truth. From that moment on, their path was inevitable. The royal exodus wasn't an impulsive decision. It was survival. And yet, Meghan's voice softens when she talks about Queen Elizabeth. She was kind, Meghan says. But she was bound by the system. Even kindness has limits in that world. There's no hatred, only sadness. Because deep down, Meghan still believes things could have been different. She looks directly at the camera, her tone steady. People think we left because we wanted to escape the press. But that's not the truth. We left because we couldn't protect our children inside that system. We had to leave to give them what the palace refused." As she finishes her sentence, the interviewer asks her, "Do you forgive them?" A long pause. Then Meghan exhales, her eyes drifting downward. "Forgiveness isn't for them," she says. "It's for me." The silence in the room is heavy. Her truth lingers like smoke. She's not trying to burn the palace down. She's just showing what's behind the curtain, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. But then she says something unexpected, something that makes even the interviewer shift in his seat. "I've kept something," she says. "Proof of what was said. Proof of what they tried to hide." The interviewer leans forward. "What kind of proof?" Meghan smiles faintly. "Let's just say, emails don't lie." And that's where she stops. The air changes. You can feel the tension, the curiosity, the unanswered question echoing in the room. Because if Meghan truly has proof, if she can show that the palace intentionally blocked her children's titles for reasons they can't admit publicly, then this isn't just a royal scandal. It's history rewritten. And what comes next might just shatter everything the crown has built. But that's the part no one saw coming. Because what happened after that revelation changed everything. And it begins with the night she realized the fight for her children's names had only just begun. It was supposed to be a quiet evening. The air at Frogmore Cottage was still, thick with the scent of rain-soaked grass and the soft hum of the countryside outside Windsor. Inside, the fireplace crackled faintly as Meghan sat on the edge of her bed, one hand resting on her swollen belly. She was 7 months pregnant with Archie, glowing in the way expectant mothers do. But that night, the glow had faded into worry. Harry was pacing, his phone clutched tight, face pale. Every so often he'd glance at her, then back at the glowing screen, as if trying to gather the courage to say something. "You need to see this," he said finally, voice strained. She looked up. "What's wrong?" He hesitated, scrolling through an email. The words came out in fragments. It's about the baby. About the title." The moment he said it, Meghan felt the air shift. Something inside her chest tightened. Titles. That word had hovered like a shadow since the day they married. Whispered by the press, dissected by royal commentators, used as both weapon and warning. "What about it?" she asked carefully. Harry sat beside her, scrolling again before reading aloud. "After review and consultation with senior advisors, it has been determined that the unborn child of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex will not carry the title of Prince or Princess." Meghan froze. For a second, the only sound was the rain against the window. "What?" she whispered. "That's not possible. That's protocol." Harry rubbed his temples. "It's supposed to be, yes. But apparently they've made an exception." "An exception?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "For our child?" He nodded. "They're saying it's a streamlining decision, that they're modernizing the monarchy." But Meghan saw it for what it was, a warning shot. Every royal baby born in direct line had been granted titles automatically, even those several steps removed from the throne. Yet somehow, the rule didn't apply to theirs. She tried to process it, to find logic in it, but the more she thought, the colder she felt. "This isn't about modernizing," she said finally. "It's about exclusion." Harry looked at her, guilt flashing in his eyes. He'd grown up inside that system. He knew its unspoken rules, its quiet prejudices. But he'd hoped things would be different for his wife and child. "I'll fix it," he said softly. "I'll talk to them." Meghan smiled faintly. "You can't fix what's designed to break you, Harry." Outside, thunder rolled over the countryside. Inside, 2 people sat in the flickering glow of a fire, realizing their family would never be treated as equal. The next morning, Meghan tried to brush it off. She told herself maybe it was temporary. Maybe once Archie was born, things would change. She'd seen the monarchy bend before, but she underestimated how rigid it could be when threatened. Hours turned into days, and the rumors started. Royal correspondents began whispering that Meghan didn't want her child to have a title, that she was too American for royal formalities, that she wanted her children raised as ordinary citizens. She remembered opening one of the tabloids one morning and reading the headline, "Meghan rejects royal status for her child." She laughed bitterly. "They're writing the opposite of reality," she said to Harry. "That's how it starts," he replied grimly. What she didn't know then was that someone inside the palace had planted that narrative deliberately. It was a diversion, a preemptive defense to make the public believe Meghan didn't want something she'd been denied. Behind the scenes, the discussions grew darker. Senior courtiers debated protocol, heritage, and optics. "We can't set a precedent," one advisor reportedly said. "If we give this, what comes next?" But what came next wasn't a policy issue. It was personal. Meghan recalls overhearing something that would haunt her for years. She'd walked past a half-open door in the palace offices one afternoon. Two senior staffers were inside, voices hushed but distinct. "She thinks this will all end in her favor," one said. "She doesn't realize those children will never be royal." The other laughed. "Best that way. The monarchy needs purity." She stopped in her tracks, frozen. The words hit like ice water. She wanted to believe she misheard. But when she looked through the narrow crack of the door, she saw their faces. Smug, indifferent, unbothered by the cruelty of what they'd said. That was the night she stopped believing it was about rules. It was about blood. And the palace, for all its polished grandeur, was about to show her just how far it would go to protect its image. Harry confronted the aides days later, demanding answers. They denied everything. "There are no issues of race or prejudice here," they insisted. "It's simply a matter of modernization." But their tone, detached, rehearsed, told him otherwise. "You're making a mistake," he warned them. "You're making history for the wrong reasons." "History remembers the crown," one replied coolly, "not the noise around it." That night, Harry returned home defeated. Meghan could see it in his eyes before he spoke. "It's done," he said quietly. "They've decided." She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she turned to the window, watching the lights of Windsor Castle glow faintly in the distance. "They think this will break us," she murmured. "They don't know me." In the weeks that followed, things grew worse. Reporters began to question why Archie wouldn't be given the same royal treatment as his cousins. The palace issued vague statements. "No comment. Still under review. Her Majesty's decision will be announced in due course." But behind closed doors, the answer was already sealed. And then came the phone call. It was late, nearly midnight, when the private line rang. Harry answered. Meghan watched as his face drained of color. "What?" he said sharply. Then softer, "I understand." He hung up, staring into nothing. "What is it?" she asked. "They're moving forward," he said numbly. "Without titles. Without security." For a moment, Meghan couldn't breathe. "Without security? They say it's consistent with their decision," he muttered. "If Archie isn't a prince, he doesn't qualify for royal protection." It wasn't just about names anymore, it was about safety. She looked at him, horrified. "You mean our baby won't be protected?" He nodded, defeated. "Not under palace funding." That was the breaking point. Meghan had tolerated the whispers, the smears, the manipulation, but risking her child's safety was unforgivable. "So that's it," she said quietly. "They'll deny him protection because they won't call him what he is?" Harry didn't answer. He didn't need to. For Meghan, something inside her hardened that night. She stopped trying to belong. The fairy tale had been written without her, and now she was done pretending. Days later, she made a private decision. "When he's born," she told Harry, "we'll name him after your mother's strength, not their approval." And that's exactly what they did. Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor. A name that carried heritage, love, and defiance. Still, the palace didn't stop. Just days after Archie's birth, reports emerged suggesting the Sussexes had rejected the offer of royal titles to give their son normality. Meghan was in the hospital, exhausted, reading lies about herself. She laughed through tears. "Normality?" she said. "They took it from us and called it a gift." Even now, years later, she remembers that irony. How the institution that stripped her child of protection also claimed to be setting him free. But what the world didn't know was that Meghan had kept everything. Every email, every note, every record of how they twisted the narrative. She wasn't just a victim. She was a witness. And that witness was about to speak. Because the night Archie's title was denied wasn't the end. It was the spark that lit a fuse. One that would unravel years of royal secrecy, reveal the hidden power struggles, and expose the real reason the palace feared her children's names. Meghan says now, "That night, I realized something. They weren't protecting the monarchy. They were protecting themselves." She glances down during the interview, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. "I told Harry that night. If they can do this to us, what else are they hiding?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because in that silence, both of them understood. The battle for their children's future had just begun. And what they were about to discover in the weeks ahead would tear open the palace walls and reveal the kind of secrets even history books never dared to print. But what came next, no one, not even Meghan, could have prepared for. Because that exception they made for Archie, it was never meant to end with him. And when Meghan learned who was behind it, everything she thought she knew about the royal family would change forever. The morning light over Windsor was pale and brittle, like a crown that had lost its shine. Meghan sat by the window with a cup of tea untouched, watching mist curl over the lawns. It had been weeks since the night the decision was made. Weeks of silence, half-truths, and official statements that danced around the truth. To the world, nothing was wrong. But inside the palace, everything had shifted. She remembers thinking, how could one set of rules apply to one branch of the family, and another entirely for hers? Why was every decision about her child treated as if it were an inconvenience? She'd grown used to double standards. But this time, the hypocrisy was glaring. She'd studied the royal line long before marrying Harry. She knew the precedents, the letters patent issued by King George V in 1917, the very decree that granted princely titles to the grandchildren of the monarch. By those same rules, Archie should have been a prince automatically once Charles became king. No debate, no review, no question. Yet somehow, her son was an exception. It wasn't about history, she says now. It was about hierarchy and who they wanted to protect. When the decision first leaked, courtiers claimed it was about slimming down the monarchy. They said King Charles wanted a modern, streamlined royal family. Fewer working royals, fewer titles, fewer expenses. It sounded reasonable enough to the public. But inside, Meghan says it was nothing more than camouflage. If it was really about modernizing, she says, why didn't they start with the ones who never showed up for work? She's referring to a few family members who lived in royal grace and favor, collecting public stipends and titles while barely performing engagements. They were never mentioned in the press. But Meghan, whose charity projects drew millions in donations, was branded a diva for asking for independence. A rule for them, another for her. Even now, Harry remembers the conversation that broke him. A senior aide had said, almost casually, the Duke's children don't need titles. They'll have plenty of opportunities in America. Harry had stared in disbelief. They're British, he said. They're my children. The aide's reply was chilling. And yet, they'll never truly be royal. That phrase haunted him. It reminded him of the whispers that surrounded his mother, Diana, how she was adored by the public but mistrusted by the palace. The pattern was repeating itself, this time with his wife and children. He'd sworn he'd never let it happen again. Meghan knew that feeling too well. Every smiling photograph, every handshake, every appearance had been dissected by tabloids looking for cracks. I couldn't breathe without it being an issue, she says. If I smiled too wide, I was fake. If I looked tired, I was miserable. But no one saw the truth. We were surviving in a system that never wanted us to fit. Behind that polished royal image, the hierarchy of value was ruthless. The bloodline dictated everything: status, treatment, protection. And though Meghan had married into the family, she would always remain an outsider. The color of her skin, the accent in her voice, the independence in her tone, they were reminders of how far she was from their mold. I was never trying to change the system, she says. I just wanted it to make sense. But sense was never part of it. Control was. When she asked about security for Archie, the palace insisted titles had nothing to do with protection. Yet, when pressed, the response shifted. Security aligns with status. So which was it? The same people contradicting themselves behind closed doors were feeding falsehoods to the press. And every time Meghan questioned it, she was accused of being difficult. The same word once used to describe Diana when she challenged outdated royal norms. Harry saw the pattern instantly. They use that word when a woman refuses to be silent, he said. They used it on my mother. Now they're using it on my wife. Still, they tried to stay calm. Tried to play by the rules. Meghan wrote letters. Harry requested meetings. Both were ignored. The courtiers had a system for this: delay, deflect, deny. The illusion of process with no real progress. Then came the contradictions. Royal commentators claimed Archie's lack of title was his parents' choice. But when Harry confronted them, the palace denied ever saying that. It was as if the institution itself had multiple faces, each one contradicting the other while never revealing the truth. It was like playing chess with a ghost, Meghan recalls. You could never see who you were really fighting. The stress began to take its toll. Meghan's sleep became restless, her appetite vanished, her nerves frayed. Every morning I'd wake up wondering what story they'd invent next, she says. And the worst part was knowing that behind every lie, there was someone inside helping to spread it. The system wasn't just broken, it was weaponized. Harry tried to comfort her, but his own fury was simmering. He'd spent years watching the press twist his mother's image until the truth didn't matter anymore. Now, it was happening again. Only this time, he couldn't save both his wife and his unborn child from the institution that fed those lies. One evening, while reviewing old correspondence, Harry came across something that made his blood run cold. A letter from the Lord Chamberlain's office to the press secretary, dated months before Archie's birth. It mentioned a review of styles and titles in anticipation of modernization measures. Meghan remembers him throwing the letter onto the table. They'd planned it, he said quietly, before he was even born. That was the moment she knew it wasn't personal spite, it was structural. They'd written her family out of the story before it began. When Meghan speaks about it now, she doesn't raise her voice. The institution protects itself first, she says. Always. And in protecting itself, it sacrificed truth, compassion, and equality, all the things it claimed to represent. She recalls one royal aide telling her, "You have to understand, it's not personal, it's precedent." She'd smiled sadly. Precedent is just prejudice with paperwork. The hypocrisy was staggering. Other royal grandchildren with no expectation of ever reigning had kept their titles, their privileges, their security. But for Archie and Lilibet, the palace claimed it was inappropriate. The same rule, rewritten selectively. The world saw smiles and ceremonies. But behind those doors, the message was clear. There were two kinds of royals, those born to the crown, and those born to be reminders of its boundaries. At one point, Meghan tried to reason with an advisor. "You talk about modernity," she said. "What's modern about punishing a child before he's even taken his first breath?" The aide didn't answer. He simply looked at her and said, "These decisions are above your station." That phrase stung more than any headline. Harry saw her crying that night, her hands pressed against her belly. "He deserves to belong," she whispered. "He's innocent. Why are they doing this?" Harry didn't know. He only knew he couldn't stand another day of silence. He demanded an audience with his father. The meeting was brief, cold, and painfully formal. When Harry raised the issue, Charles reportedly sighed and said, "It's complicated, son. Times have changed." "Changed for who?" Harry asked. "For everyone, or just us?" There was no answer, and that silence told him everything. In the following days, Meghan found herself studying old photographs of Diana. She'd always admired her compassion, her courage. Now, she saw the pain behind Diana's eyes, the quiet war she'd fought inside those same walls. It was eerie, Meghan admits. It felt like history was repeating itself. Only this time, the stakes were higher. She wasn't wrong. Because while the world debated gossip, the real story was happening behind closed doors, an institutional effort to protect image over people, lineage over love. Even the Queen, Meghan says, seemed torn. "I never blamed her," she admits softly. "She was part of the system, not its author. But I could see the strain in her. I think she knew what was happening, but she couldn't stop it." It's here that Meghan's tone hardens. "They said tradition couldn't be changed," she says. "But they changed it the moment we walked in." The irony burns. An institution built on lineage, supposedly above bias, bending its own rules to exclude the first mixed-race child born into it. "You can dress it up however you want," she says. "Call it modernization, call it simplification. But when the result looks like exclusion, you have to call it what it is." Even Harry admits he underestimated how deep the resistance went. "We thought we were just challenging protocol," he says. "We didn't realize we were challenging history." As the months passed, the toll deepened. Every time Meghan smiled for the cameras, she carried the weight of decisions made in smoky rooms where her name was spoken like a problem to be solved. Every family portrait felt incomplete, every official statement laced with subtext. And yet, through it all, she held on to one thought. One day, the truth would come out. That day would arrive sooner than anyone expected. Because as the debates continued inside the palace, one document, buried deep within an internal archive, was about to surface. A document that would reveal exactly how far the institution had gone to block Archie and Lilibet's titles. And the discovery of that document would turn quiet resentment into full-blown rebellion. But before that revelation came to light, Meghan would face something even more dangerous, a public betrayal from within her own circle, a betrayal that would twist the knife and prove just how isolated she truly was. And what she uncovered next would leave her questioning everything she thought she knew about loyalty inside the royal family. It was one of those nights that still replayed in Meghan's memory like a scene from a cold, dimly lit film. Quiet corridors, muffled footsteps, and a kind of stillness that didn't feel peaceful but tense. The meeting at Clarence House was never meant to make headlines. In fact, most of the public didn't even know it happened. But to Meghan and Harry, it was the night everything they believed about family, fairness, and the crown itself finally shattered. Harry had received the invitation, though invitation might not have been the right word. It was more of a summons. Come alone, the note had said. No assistants, no aides, and, specifically, no Meghan. That in itself was strange. Official meetings were usually scheduled through channels, confirmed by secretaries. This one came quietly, slipped through intermediaries who didn't want records or witnesses. Clarence House, the residence of Prince Charles at the time, was wrapped in late evening silence when Harry arrived. The guards nodded him through without a word. He was ushered into a small drawing room that smelled faintly of cedarwood and polished silver. It wasn't grand like Buckingham Palace. It was more personal, intimate, and somehow more dangerous because of it. When the door closed behind him, he realized he wasn't meeting just his father. There were others, 2 senior courtiers, a communications advisor, and an assistant private secretary. They sat in a semicircle, papers on their laps, expressions coldly neutral. Harry glanced at his father. You said this was about Archie's future. Charles shifted uncomfortably. Yes. Well, it's about expectations. Expectations. That word again. The same word they'd used when talking about Diana. The same word they'd used to justify every royal decision that made no human sense. Archie's title, Harry began. I've seen the correspondence. It's not protocol. It's personal. Charles sighed. Harry, you must understand, times are different. The monarchy can't expand endlessly. We're protecting the institution for future generations. Harry clenched his jaw. By cutting off your own? One of the courtiers leaned forward, his tone dripping with condescension. It's not a punishment, Your Royal Highness. It's a matter of representation. The public mood has changed. Harry shot back. The public doesn't decide my son's worth. That line hung in the air like smoke. No one answered. Charles avoided his gaze, staring at the ornate rug as if searching for escape. Then, almost too casually, the communications advisor spoke. There are concerns, sir, about perception. Harry frowned. What kind of concerns? The man hesitated. You've married into a world that doesn't always align with the institution's image. Some feel it would be wiser to minimize. Minimize? Harry interrupted sharply. Minimize what? My wife. My children. Silence again. A dangerous silence. Charles rubbed his forehead. It's not that simple, Harry. The monarchy has always evolved. It must reflect the times. We're simplifying titles to erase us, Harry said flatly. Just say it. No one moved. In that instant, he realized this wasn't a negotiation, it was an announcement. The decision had already been made. He wasn't there to discuss it. He was there to be told. Meanwhile, at home, Meghan waited. She hadn't been able to sleep. Every creak of the old cottage made her nerves jolt. She kept glancing at the clock, counting the minutes. Harry had promised to call her as soon as he left the meeting. He didn't. When he finally walked through the door hours later, his face told her everything. He sat on the edge of their bed, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. They said it's final, he murmured. They're cutting us out of the line of working royals. The kids won't have titles. Not now. Not ever. Meghan's voice cracked. Did you ask why? Harry's expression darkened. They said perception. They said some people might not accept it. She stared at him, stunned. Some people? What people? He looked down, inside and out. And that was the moment Meghan realized. The resistance wasn't just institutional. It was personal. There were people inside the palace who couldn't accept that the face of the future royal family might look different from its past. For days, She replayed that conversation in her mind. The way they'd said some people. The way the words had been careful, diplomatic, sanitized, as if polished to hide what they really meant. The emotional fallout was brutal. Meghan felt betrayed, humiliated, and trapped. Yet she knew losing her composure would only feed the tabloids that were waiting to paint her as hysterical. So she smiled through events, through photo ops, through garden appearances, all while knowing the truth. Her family had been quietly stripped of equality. She began to notice changes in how the palace handled their affairs. Invitations were delayed. Staffers became distant. Requests were under review or pending. Even her communications officer, once warm and supportive, began to avoid her eyes. Every smile around me started to feel like a mask, she says now. It was like everyone knew something I wasn't supposed to. Behind closed doors, Harry grew more furious by the day. We're their scapegoats, he told her one night. They use us to distract the public whenever another scandal hits. He wasn't wrong. The palace machinery had perfected that art, releasing subtle leaks, feeding tabloids, redirecting blame. Whenever a senior royal faced scrutiny, somehow stories about Meghan's temper or extravagance appeared in the press. The Clarence House meeting was just one act in a larger play, a quiet war of image control. Meghan and Harry had unknowingly become characters in a narrative written by people who saw them as threats to tradition. And then, a week later, came the twist that confirmed her worst fears. One of Harry's trusted staffers slipped him a printed email thread, forwarded anonymously. It showed internal correspondence between senior courtiers discussing long-term optics for the Sussex branch. One line stood out, underlined in red. Maintaining the Sussex children's exclusion from HRH styling ensures clarity of succession and avoids public confusion. Clarity, confusion. Those were the polite words they used to describe deliberate exclusion. Harry handed the paper to Meghan. She read it in silence, then placed it on the table. They want to erase us quietly, she said. But not before they use us. That sentence hit him harder than any tabloid headline ever had. Because that's what it felt like, being used. Their wedding, the diversity it represented, the global goodwill it generated. All of it had been paraded as evidence of a modern monarchy. But when it came to real inclusion, real equality, the doors slammed shut. They wanted the photo, Meghan says. Not the family. Harry tried one more time to reason with his father. He called him days after the meeting, desperate for a human answer. Charles sounded weary. You and Meghan must understand, he said. The monarchy is bigger than any one of us. Harry replied. Then maybe it's too small to hold the truth. The line went quiet. The next morning, palace officials released a carefully worded statement to the press. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have expressed their wish that their children be raised as private citizens. Meghan read it and laughed bitterly. They turned our pain into a preference, she said. Every time they tried to tell the truth, the palace twisted it. Every attempt to clarify only deepened the perception that they were rebellious, ungrateful, dramatic. It was emotional warfare disguised as etiquette. Still, Meghan refused to let bitterness consume her. I had to remind myself why we were fighting, she says. Not for status, for dignity. But dignity was a dangerous thing inside an institution built on silence. The moment you spoke, you became the problem. And Meghan had spoken, not through tabloids or interviews, but through her quiet refusal to disappear. That's when she began to notice whispers spreading among the staff, rumors that she was planning something, that she'd leak documents, that she was untrustworthy. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. They were laying the groundwork for her downfall. What she didn't know was that someone close to her, someone she thought was a friend, had already betrayed her trust. And that betrayal would soon explode publicly, threatening to destroy everything she and Harry were trying to protect. But that's a story for the next chapter. Because for now, Meghan's world had already changed. The Clarence House meeting had stripped away the last illusion of equality. She finally saw the truth. She wasn't fighting for inclusion. She was fighting against an institution that would never let her win. And as she stood by the window one night, watching the lights flicker over Windsor, she whispered to Harry, "They've made their rules. Now we'll make ours." He turned to her, his voice steady. "Then let's show them what happens when the ones they try to silence start telling the truth." Neither of them knew it yet, but that decision, to tell their truth, would unleash a storm that would shake the monarchy to its core. Because if the meeting at Clarence House was meant to silence Meghan and Harry, it did the opposite. It ignited them. And the next move they made would not only challenge royal tradition, it would expose the cracks in the crown itself. But what came next would make even that night look tame. Because the palace wasn't done. Not by a long shot. And the next secret meeting wouldn't stay secret for long. It began with silence. The kind that doesn't soothe, but suffocates. The kind that fills the hallways of a royal residence long after the arguments have ended and the decisions have already been made. Harry sat alone in his study at Frogmore, papers scattered across the desk. A faint wind rattled the window panes, but inside, the only sound was the slow, rhythmic ticking of an antique clock. The same clock, ironically, that once hung in his mother's Kensington quarters. Time, he thought, had a cruel sense of humor. Everything changes, and yet nothing does. Since that meeting at Clarence House, something inside him had started to crack. The walls he'd built to protect himself, the composure, the diplomacy, the polite restraint, they were crumbling. Every letter, every official statement, every photo opportunity felt like a performance in a play he no longer wanted to star in. He stared at the letter in his hands again, the one confirming that Archie and any future children would remain untitled. It was printed on heavy cream stationery, signed in the tidy handwriting of a senior aide. No emotion, no warmth, just a verdict disguised as procedure. For years, Harry had told himself that the crown was about service, duty, family. He'd believed the system could be humanized, that his mother's death had changed things. But now, he was seeing the same cold machinery that had once isolated her, working all over again. He thought of Diana's old words, ones she'd written in a private letter that he kept folded inside a book. They will never protect you the way you protect them. He understood now, completely. That night, Meghan found him sitting by the window, staring out into the dark. "You haven't slept," she said quietly. He shook his head. "I keep hearing their voices," he said, "telling me it's not personal, that it's policy. But it's personal when it's your son, Meg." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can't fix what was built to stay broken." He looked up at her then, eyes red, jaw clenched. "I have to try. For her. For them." The palace had underestimated him. They thought Harry's rebellion would burn out. They thought his loyalty to his grandmother would keep him docile. But grief had a way of reshaping loyalty. And when he looked at Archie's crib, he no longer saw a baby wrapped in royal lineage. He saw a child he had to protect from the very institution that bore his name. The final straw came during a meeting at Buckingham Palace weeks later. It was supposed to be a reconciliation session, an attempt to smooth tensions between Harry, his father, and senior advisors. But Harry would later describe it as a staged intervention, designed to break him down and remind him of his place. He arrived expecting a conversation. Instead, he found himself surrounded by 4 men in tailored suits and measured smiles. His father sat at the far end of a long mahogany table, hands clasped. "Harry," Charles began, "this hostility must end. The family can't function under constant strain." Harry leaned forward. "Hostility? You denied my son his birthright." An advisor interjected smoothly. "Titles are symbolic. They don't define worth." Harry turned sharply. "Then why take them away?" The man hesitated, then said, "You must understand, public perception is delicate. We cannot allow." "Allow what?" Harry snapped. "That my children exist?" The room fell silent. Charles looked uncomfortable. The courtiers shifted in their chairs. Harry had crossed a line, one you weren't supposed to cross in royal circles. You could hint at truth, but never say it plainly. He stood, fists trembling. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to her?" Charles's tone hardened. "Enough, Harry. Your mother played this game before. We all saw how that ended. That was it." The moment, everything inside him broke. "My mother didn't play anything," Harry said, voice shaking. "She fought for her life while you let them destroy her." The air in the room turned electric. One of the aides stood abruptly, muttering something about calling security, but Charles raised a hand. "Leave us," he said softly. The others filed out, closing the heavy door behind them. For a long moment, there was silence again, the kind that feels like standing on the edge of a cliff. "Do you really think this helps anyone?" Charles asked, voice low. Harry's reply came out as a whisper. "It helps me breathe." His father sighed, almost weary. "You've always been impulsive. You act first, regret later. I won't regret protecting my family, Harry shot back. You taught me what happens when you stay silent. Charles's eyes flickered. For a second, Harry thought he saw a hint of guilt. Or was it fear? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. The monarchy isn't built on emotion, Charles said finally. It's built on endurance. Then maybe it's time it broke, Harry said. He left before his father could respond. Outside the palace gates, cameras flashed like lightning. He ignored them, walking fast into the cold London air. For the first time in his life, he didn't care what they printed tomorrow. The old Harry, the dutiful soldier, the obedient prince, was gone. Something else had taken his place, a father who'd had enough. When he returned to Frogmore, Meghan was waiting by the door. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. His face told her everything. We're leaving, he said simply. Leaving, she echoed. Yes. The titles, the protocols, the briefings, all of it. I can't raise them here, Meg. Not in this. Her first reaction wasn't relief. It was fear. Leaving the royal family wasn't like changing jobs or moving cities. It was exile, dressed up as freedom. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in months: resolve. The decision was made that night, quietly, without fanfare. But before they could plan their exit, the palace struck first. Within days, tabloids mysteriously began publishing insider reports claiming Harry and Meghan were plotting to monetize their royal status. Others accused Meghan of driving a wedge between Harry and his family. The smear campaign was swift, brutal, and coordinated. It felt like they were testing how much they could destroy us before we broke, Meghan would later say. Harry started to see the pattern. Every time they tried to reclaim their narrative, the palace fed another leak to the media. A war of perception had begun, one he hadn't asked for, but couldn't escape. Still, the breaking point wasn't public. It was private. It came one night, months later, when Harry received a message from an old family friend, a quiet insider who had worked within the palace for decades. The message was simple. It's already done. The decision's permanent. But it's not just about titles, Harry. It's about inheritance. Harry read it twice, his blood running cold. He showed it to Meghan. Inheritance, she asked. He nodded grimly. If the kids aren't titled, their inheritance rights change. It affects trust allocations, access to family estates. It's all connected. In one stroke, the institution hadn't just stripped their children of titles. It had cut them out of royal legacy altogether. That was the night Harry truly lost faith in the system he'd spent his life defending. He walked outside into the freezing air, his breath visible in the moonlight. For a long time, he stood beneath the ancient trees, staring up at the sky. Somewhere in that darkness, he thought he heard his mother's voice again, not literally, but in memory. When they stop protecting you, protect your own. He whispered to himself, I will. From that moment on, Harry stopped trying to negotiate. He began to prepare. Behind the scenes, he contacted lawyers, security experts, and financial advisors. He started quietly moving assets, making arrangements for a life outside royal reach. Meghan noticed the change. He was quieter, sharper, focused. But every decision came with risk. Leaving the royal family wasn't just defiance. It was a declaration of independence against one of the oldest institutions in the world. And every move would be watched, judged, and spun against them. Even so, Harry didn't flinch. I'd rather be hated for protecting them, he told Meghan, than loved for doing nothing. When the announcement finally came, that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex would step back from royal duties, the palace was blindsided. The statement was crafted in secret, released on their own terms. For once, the story broke before the courtiers could bury it. The response from the palace was swift and cold. Discussions are at an early stage, a spokesman said. These are complicated issues that will take time. Translation, they were furious. But for Harry, it didn't matter. He had crossed the point of no return. That night, as Meghan tucked Archie into bed, Harry stood by the window, looking out at the estate one last time. I grew up believing this place was home, he said quietly. But it was never ours, was it? Meghan shook her head. Home isn't where you're accepted by others. It's where you can finally be yourself. He smiled faintly. Then let's find ours. Outside, the wind howled across the gardens, rattling the windows like the ghost of old traditions refusing to die. But inside, for the first time, Harry felt something close to peace. He knew the storm was coming, the backlash, the headlines, the exile. But he also knew something else. The truth was finally on their side. What he didn't know yet was that the war he thought he was escaping had only just begun. Because when the palace realized it couldn't control them anymore, it decided to destroy them instead. And the first strike would come from someone they never expected. It started slowly. At first just whispers, harmless-seeming headlines that floated across tabloids like smoke. Meghan and Harry's unusual request for privacy. Palace sources questioned couples' independence. The tone wasn't hostile yet. It was cautious, probing, like wolves circling prey before the first bite. But inside the palace, the media war had already begun. After the Clarence House meeting and Harry's quiet rebellion, an invisible line had been crossed. Meghan and Harry were no longer viewed as wayward royals who simply needed guidance. They were viewed as liabilities, a danger to the carefully curated image of the British monarchy. And the crown, as history has always shown, protects itself. Meghan first felt the shift when she noticed the subtle change in the headlines. The friendly coverage, the modern duchess, the refreshing outsider, vanished overnight. Suddenly, every gesture was a scandal. Every outfit a provocation. Every word she spoke became proof of defiance. It was too synchronized to be random. The couple had long suspected that someone inside the palace machinery was feeding stories to the press. But the precision of the leaks after Harry's confrontation left no doubt. It wasn't just gossip, it was strategy. They used the press as their sword, Meghan would later say, and our silence as their shield. The palace couldn't silence Meghan directly. Doing so would look cruel, outdated, vindictive. So instead, it began to weaponize perception. It leaked fragments of truth, stripped of context, wrapped in insinuation. It didn't have to tell full lies. It only had to tell half-truths often enough for people to believe the rest. A story would drop in the Sun, then echo through the Daily Mail, then bounce to morning television, where commentators discussed Meghan's attitude, her disregard for tradition, her need for control. By the end of the week, those talking points became fact. She's controlling Harry. She's cutting him off from his family. She's rewriting royal rules for her own benefit. The headlines didn't need evidence. They just needed repetition. At first, Meghan tried to ignore it. Don't read the papers, Harry told her. But the stories crept into everything. They colored every interaction, every public appearance. Smiles became statements. Gestures were dissected like court evidence. And then the tone shifted from criticism to cruelty. One headline read, Meghan's diva demands. Another, staff call her Duchess difficult. None of it was true, but that didn't matter. Once the narrative takes hold, truth becomes irrelevant. The palace didn't deny the stories, it never does. Silence, Meghan learned, was its most powerful weapon. Silence implies restraint, wisdom, superiority. But inside those gilded walls, silence was simply complicity. The first public fallout came during what should have been a joyful moment, Archie's christening. The couple had wanted privacy for their newborn. Instead, the tabloids framed it as a royal rebellion. Meghan bans Queen's photographer, screamed one headline. Public outrage as Sussexes hide baby from the people. Harry was furious. They can photograph everyone else's children, he snapped. Why not ours? Because privacy, Meghan realized, was a privilege royals only had when they obeyed. Then came the stories about staff resignations. She made a personal assistant cry. She sent emails at 5 a.m. She yelled at a designer over flowers. None of it was verified. All of it was widely shared. And the most infuriating part? Many of those stories, Meghan discovered, came from palace insiders. Not journalists. Not strangers. Insiders. It was betrayal, dressed in the language of press releases. For Harry, this was where restraint ended. He saw in the headlines the same slow character assassination that had claimed his mother. I won't watch this happen again, he told Meghan one night, pacing the living room. Not to you. Not to our children. He called the palace communications office directly. You need to shut this down, he demanded. The reply was chillingly calm. We can't control the press, sir. You know that. But Harry wasn't naive. He'd grown up watching how the palace used press briefings to protect some and sacrifice others. He knew stories didn't just appear, they were placed. Days later, he received a private email from a former royal aide. It contained a screenshot of a briefing memo sent to a senior tabloid editor. The subject line, "Talking points, Sussex narrative." Under it, bullet points. Emphasize independence. Question Meghan's fit within royal traditions. Frame decisions as impulsive. Highlight staff turnover concerns. There it was, in writing. The smear campaign. Harry printed the email, folded it carefully, and handed it to Meghan. "This is how they kill people," he said quietly. "Not with bullets, with headlines." Meghan broke down that night. "I left my whole life behind," she whispered. "My family, my friends, my freedom. And for what? To be turned into a villain for existing." But even in her despair, something hardened inside her. She began to understand that silence wasn't safety, it was surrender. So, when she sat down for her first private conversation with a trusted journalist, she didn't give details. She didn't name names. She simply said one sentence that would echo for weeks. "Things are not as they seem inside those walls." That was all it took. Within hours, headlines erupted. Meghan Markle's secret confession, palace panic ensues. Royal correspondents scrambled for sources. Courtiers scrambled for control. For the first time, the palace realized she wasn't going to play their game by their rules. The next morning, Harry received a furious call from an aide at Clarence's house. "You've unleashed chaos," the man shouted. "She's undermining the family." Harry replied coldly. "Maybe the family should stop undermining her." The line went dead. From that moment forward, the relationship between the Sussexes and the palace was broken beyond repair. The leaks intensified. Personal letters between Meghan and her estranged father somehow appeared in the mail on Sunday. Paparazzi began following their car routes with uncanny precision. Private photos were published without consent. It wasn't journalism, it was warfare. And behind it all, Harry knew there was a hand guiding the chaos. One night, sitting on the couch beside Meghan, he said what they were both thinking. "This isn't about titles anymore. It's about control. They're trying to make you break." She looked at him, eyes steady. "Then they'll be disappointed." In public, Meghan wore calm like armor. She smiled at events, shook hands, and performed grace. But privately, she kept records. Every message, every call, every instance of palace interference. She was no longer just surviving. She was building a case. Then, as if by fate, the truth began to leak from their side. A sympathetic staffer, someone still inside, contacted a journalist abroad. "They're feeding false stories," the staffer said. "It's coordinated." The reporter asked, "How high does it go?" The answer came with a sigh. "All the way." It was the first crack in the wall. The first time the public began to question whether the problem was really Meghan or the institution itself. But even as that doubt spread, the palace doubled down. A senior aide called a private meeting at Sandringham. "We need containment," he said. "We need to control the narrative before they do." A communications plan was drawn up. Codename, Operation Stability. Its purpose was clear: portray Meghan and Harry as unstable, emotional, and unfit for royal duty. The strategy worked, at least for a while. Opinion polls dipped. Commentators began asking whether Hollywood values were poisoning the monarchy. The tabloids framed Harry as lost, Meghan as manipulative, and the Queen as heartbroken. It was the perfect story, a tragedy for the public, a victory for the palace. Until Harry decided to fight back. He released a rare personal statement through his private office, something royals almost never do. It read, in part, "I lost my mother to the same forces now destroying my wife. I will not stand by and watch history repeat itself." Those words landed like a thunderclap. For the first time, Harry had said what everyone else was too afraid to, that the monarchy and the media were entangled in a toxic dance, one that thrived on sacrifice. The palace's response was immediate and icy. "We do not comment on private matters." But the damage was done. The war was no longer in whispers. It was public, bloody, and unstoppable. Behind the scenes, a senior royal aide warned Harry in confidence. "They'll never forgive you for that statement. You've declared war." Harry didn't flinch. Then they should prepare to lose. The next few weeks blurred into chaos. Phone calls from lawyers, late-night security scares, endless front-page lies. But through it all, one thing became clear. The institution that had spent years protecting its image would now spend years trying to erase theirs. Still, Meghan remained calm. "Let them try," she said. "We've already survived worse." And she was right, because just when the media storm reached its peak, something unexpected happened. A sympathetic insider, someone with direct access to the palace archives, contacted Harry with a cryptic message. There's something you should see. Something they never wanted you to find.